Chapter 17. A Worthless Lead. Even after the plate was significantly fixed, so that it could be safely exposed to bright light, Penny and her father were unable to find anything in the picture which offered a clue to the mysterious disappearance of Jerry. "We'll print it up, Fred," Mr. Parker said, "but unless Gregory Keene is a lot smarter than I can't see that the photograph will be of any use to him." Until now, the newspaper man had maintained a forced cheerfulness, but his confidence that Jerry would be found had received a hard jolt. He had counted heavily upon the photograph. "I blame myself for what's happened," he told Penny as they drove towards home. "It was a crazy idea of mine putting Jerry in that room alone. If we don't find him—" "We'll find him, Dad," Penny said determinedly. "We must." "I don't give a hang about the story now. I've sacrificed 100 scoops to prevent a thing like this from occurring." "It wasn't your fault, Dad. You mustn't blame yourself." "I'll solve the case if it's the last thing I ever do," Mr. Parker declared with returning anger. "It isn't sense that 3 persons can disappear under exactly the same circumstances and leave no clue." The car had reached the Parker residence. "Aren't you coming in?" Penny asked as her father opened the door for her. "No, I'm going back to White Falls," he replied. "Maybe there's nothing I can do, but I prefer to remain on the scene. Let me know if Jerry is found or if anything new develops." The very instant Mr. Parker promised. Penny slept fitfully during the few hours which remained of the night. She kept hoping that her father would telephone, but the morning came and no word had been received from him. She was just sitting down to a lonely breakfast when Mr. Parker's car was heard on the driveway. He came into the house a moment later, looking tired and worn, his eyes bloodshot from the lack of sleep. "Any news, Dad?" she asked quickly. "No," he responded dejectedly. "That is, nothing of consequence." He sat down at the breakfast table, saying to Mrs. Weems, who had come in from the kitchen, "Just a cup of strong black coffee, please." "Dad, you should eat some breakfast," Penny protested. Mr. Parker shook his head. "I don't feel like it." "Hasn't anything developed at all?" Penny asked, shrinking down into a chair beside her father. "Not in regards to Jerry. Gregory Keene is of the opinion we may never see him again, or if we do, his body will be taken from the river." "Oh, Dad!" "Mudcat was starting to drag the river when I left. That means it won't be long until everyone in the village will know what has happened. Not that it matters much, I guess. However, when the police get wind of the affair, I may have some tall explaining to do." "Dad, does Gregory Keene think the Comstocks had any part in Jerry's disappearance?" "Not that I can get out of him. He did force Gus Comstock to reveal where Harmon's car was hidden. It was found in the woods some distance off a side road. Comstock claims he disposed of the automobile merely to avoid questioning by the police. His story has been the same always," Penny acknowledged, "but I don't trust that fellow. Greg learned one fact which may interest you." "What is that, Dad?" "The Comstocks are not the owners of the old mansion." "They aren't? Well, that is a surprise. The Comstocks are merely caretakers. They're listed as live-ins. And there so long they came to regard the house particularly as their own." "Who's the owner?" "A woman named Irene Faraday, living in Baltimore." "I wonder if she has any idea of what's been going on at her place." "No, the Comstocks have kept her in ignorance, fearing that they might cost them their jobs. You see, they opened the house as a tourist place without Mrs. Faraday's consent. That was a high-handed thing to do, although quite in keeping with Gus Comstock's character. Yes, he figured Mrs. Faraday never would find out, for she hasn't visited the house since she left nearly 10 years ago. Why has she kept the place occupied, I wonder? Sentimental reasons, I suppose." Mrs. Faraday was married in that house. 2 of her children died there, and likewise her husband. Not in room 7, Penny said with a shiver. No, not to my knowledge. At one time the house was considered quite a show place, but some 10 years ago or more, restrictions were removed and shop buildings went up beside the dwelling. The river cut in closer too. Mrs. Faraday then moved to Baltimore. Yes, she employed the Comstocks as caretakers and leaving everything in their charge, went east and never returned. The house was furnished, Dad? Yes, the Comstocks have admitted to Gregory Keene that everything, furniture, paintings, even the glassware, belongs to Mrs. Faraday. I'd rather thought the Comstocks had never finished that house. However, I can't say much for Mrs. Faraday's taste in paintings. Some of those portraits are mere daubs in expensive frames. You're wrong, Penny, smiled her father. Your friend Lem, the cafe owner, told me those paintings had considerable value. They may have cost money, but Dad, can't you see how atrocious they are? They didn't appeal to me, Mr. Parker admitted. However, I don't pretend to know about art. Even a blind man could tell those paintings aren't art, insisted Penny. If they're supposed to be valuable, then someone must have cheated Mrs. Faraday. Well, at any rate, she considers them worth enough to merit keeping a caretaker for 10 years. The Comstocks receive only a small salary and the use for the property. That was one reason why they began taking in tourists. They needed extra money. I wish I knew if Gus Comstock owns that shed where Mudcat Joe and his family live, Penny said thoughtfully. I doubt if the man has any property of his own. So do I, declared Penny, feelingly. The chances are he was trying to drive Joe off the property belonging to Mrs. Faraday. Maybe as caretaker he had the right to, but it seems to me he's suddenly taking his duties very seriously. Yes, considering that he has been unfaithful to the trust in other ways. Someone should let Mrs. Faraday know about how the old mansion is being operated. I suggested to Gregory Keene that we try to get in touch with her, Mr. Parker declared. He didn't believe it would do any good. She should be informed just on general principle, it seems to me. Dad, would you care if I sent her a telegram? Go ahead if you like, Mr. Parker agreed. Here is her address, or at least it's the one that Mrs. Comstock gave Greg. He handed Penny a slip of paper and, drinking the last of his coffee, hurriedly arose from the table. I'll be at the office for an hour, he said. After that, I'll probably return to White Falls. When the breakfast dishes had been cleared away, Penny backed her own car from the garage and drove over to Louise's. Together the girls composed the telegram to Mrs. Faraday and dispatched it. She'll think the worst when she receives our message, Louise said uneasily. What if she should come here? I hope she does decide to come, said Penny. It's time Mrs. Faraday checks up on the Comstocks. After the telegram had been sent, there was nothing more to occupy their minds. Both Louise and Penny fretted at the inactivity. If only we could do something to help, Louise commented. It's so hard to just sit and wait and hope. We could drive over to White Falls, Penny suggested. I'd rather be there than here. So would I. By this time the girls knew every inch of the road between Riverview and White Falls and could make the drive in excellent time. They were approaching the Cobalt River near the locality where Mudcat Joe had made his temporary home when Penny suddenly applied the brakes. Louise regarded her in surprise. You're stopping there again today? She inquired. Then she saw that Penny's gaze was riveted upon the roadside directly ahead. Jenny Gates, her 3 children gathered close beside her, sat dejectedly on an old log. Not far away were all their worldly possessions, a rusty stove, 2 cots, bedding, and a box of cooking pans. "Something seems to be wrong," said Penny anxiously. "It looks to me as if Mudcat and his family have been put out of their home." "Do, do, do, do,